In January 1947, Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress, was found brutally murdered in Los Angeles. The crime, with its macabre details, made headlines and became one of the greatest criminal mysteries in history. Today, in Crimes and Mysteries, we're going to delve into the life of Elizabeth Short, the investigation and theories surrounding the infamous case known as the Black Dahlia. Who was Elizabeth Short? Elizabeth was born on July 29, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts. She was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. During the Great Depression, the father abandoned the family, leaving Elizabeth and her sisters in the care of their mother, who faced financial difficulties. At age 15, Elizabeth was diagnosed with chronic respiratory problems, which led her family to send her to Florida during the winter months. At age 19, Elizabeth reconnected with her father, who lived in California, and moved to live with him. She dreamed of being an actress, but opportunities were scarce. To survive, she worked as a waitress and lived in cheap shelters. Her social life was busy, and Elizabeth was described as charismatic and elegant, but also as someone who kept secrets. Before her death, Elizabeth lived an unstable life, frequently changing addresses. She was last seen on January 9, 1947, in the lobby of the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles. On January 15, 1947, Elizabeth's body was found in a deserted area of the Limit Park neighborhood in Los Angeles. A woman who was walking with her sons saw the body and, thinking it was a mannequin, approached to check. The body was cut in half at the waist, with surgical precision, without damaging the internal organs. It was completely drained of blood, indicating that death occurred elsewhere before the body was moved. The face had been cut from ear to ear, creating the so-called Glasgow smile. The arms were raised above the head and the legs were spread, with the body positioned in a deliberately macabre way. Elizabeth was brutally tortured before she was killed. There were burn marks and cuts on the skin. The cause of death was hemorrhage and traumatic shock caused by the injuries. The murder caused panic in Los Angeles, with the media dubbing the case the crime of the century. The nickname Black Dahlia was coined by reporters inspired by the 1946 film Blue Dahlia, and because Elizabeth often wore black clothes. There were no clear clues at the crime scene, such as fingerprints or footprints. The precision of the cuts led investigators to believe that the killer had medical or anatomical knowledge. More than 150 people confessed to the murder, including women. Many of these confessions were discarded due to inconsistencies with the evidence. The police had difficulty filtering out relevant information, given the enormous media attention. Police questioned several suspects, including friends and acquaintances of Elizabeth Short. They also questioned several local doctors and people with criminal records. None were formally charged due to lack of conclusive evidence. The Black Dahlia case has spawned countless theories about who might be responsible for the brutal murder of Elizabeth Short. Let's now look at and try to understand the main theories. Who was George Hodel? George Hodel was an influential doctor in Los Angeles, known for his connections to elite figures and his eccentric behavior. He specialized in surgery and gynecology, which made him qualified to perform the precise cuts found on Elizabeth's body. In 1949, he was accused of abusing his daughter, Tamar, and faced trial. During the case, Tamar claimed that her father may also have been involved in the Black Dahlia murder. The Los Angeles police bugged Hodel's home in 1950, where they recorded a conversation in which he said, "Suppose I killed the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it because my secretary is dead." After his death, George's son, Steve Hodel, who was a detective, found photographs of a woman who appeared to be Elizabeth Short in his father's estate. George Hodel was fascinated by surrealist art, particularly the works of Man Ray, and some experts believe that Elizabeth's body mutation imitated the style and some surrealist artwork, suggesting a symbolic or artistic motive. Although the circumstantial evidence against Hodel is overwhelming, conclusive physical evidence such as DNA is lacking. Therefore, he was never charged with the crime. Another suspect was Jack Anderson Wilson. Who was Wilson? Wilson was a man with a history of violence, alcoholism, and erratic behavior. He reportedly confessed details of Elizabeth's murder to a friend who later reported the information to authorities. During the investigation, Wilson demonstrated detailed knowledge of the crime, including information that was not widely publicized. He was known to frequent areas of Los Angeles, where Elizabeth was seen before she disappeared. Before he could be formally questioned, Wilson died in a fire under suspicious circumstances. His death left many unanswered questions, but his name continues to be associated with the case. Could he have been the one responsible for the case, or was he the so-called secretary that Hodel spoke about? Suspect number 3 is Mark Hansen. Hansen was a Danish businessman and owner of a nightclub in Los Angeles, known for offering accommodation to young women in distress. Hansen had connections with Elizabeth Short, who reportedly stayed at his home on several occasions. After the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner received a package containing Elizabeth Short's belongings, including an address book with the name Mark Hansen engraved on the cover. Hansen was one of the last people to speak to Elizabeth before her disappearance, having spoken to her by telephone on January 9, 1947. Despite the calls and suspicions, Mark Hansen cooperated with authorities during the investigation. The lack of concrete evidence led to his exclusion as a prime suspect, and he was never formally charged. Suspect number 4, Robert Red Manley. Robert was a 25-year-old married iron salesman who became a central figure in the Elizabeth Short murder case. He was the last confirmed person to see Elizabeth alive before her tragic end. Manley met Elizabeth in San Diego in late 1946. On January 8, 1947, Manley met Elizabeth and offered her a ride to Los Angeles. They spent the night in a motel where, according to Manley, there was no intimate involvement. The next morning he took her to the Biltmore Hotel where she mentioned she was going to meet her sister. After dropping her off at the hotel, Manley returned to his family. Although Manley was the last known person to see Elizabeth alive, investigations found no evidence linking him to her death. His cooperation with authorities and passing of polygraph tests resulted in his exclusion as a suspect. However, the case profoundly affected his personal life and mental health for years to come. Manley died on January 9, 1986, exactly 39 years after leaving Elizabeth at the Biltmore Hotel. Suspect number 5. Leslie Dillon, a former funeral director's assistant and aspiring writer. He began a correspondence with Dr. Joseph Paul de River, a Los Angeles police psychiatrist, claiming an interest in writing a book about sexual psychopaths. In his letters he mentioned a friend named Jeff Connors who he said might be involved in the murder of Elizabeth Short. Intrigued by the information provided, Dr. de River arranged a meeting with Dillon in Las Vegas. During the interrogation, Dillon revealed details that raised suspicions about his possible involvement in the crime. He was then detained by Los Angeles police for formal questioning. Some investigations suggest that Dillon could have committed the crime at the request of Mark Hansen, with whom Elizabeth Short had disagreements. Author Piu Eatwell in her book, Black Dahlia Red Rose argues that Dillon along with Hansen and Jeff Connors was involved in the murder. Eatwell cites among other evidence the testimony of a motel owner who found one of his rooms covered in blood and fecal matter at the time of the murder, suggesting that the crime could have occurred there. Despite the suspicions, the police were unable to obtain conclusive evidence against Dillon. He later sued the Los Angeles Police Department for unlawful arrest, although the case was dropped. Authorities sought to locate Jeff Connors for questioning. An individual identified as Arthur Lee Lane Jr., also known as R.T. Lane, was arrested in San Francisco in January 1949, under suspicion of being Jeff Connors. Records indicated that Lane was working as a laborer at Columbia Studios at the time of Elizabeth Short's murder. However, the investigation was unable to establish a definitive link between Lane or Connors and the crime. Other theories: some theorists believe that the case was covered up due to the involvement of powerful and influential figures in Los Angeles, possibly linked to organized crime or the Hollywood elite. Number 1. History of corruption. The Los Angeles police in the 1940s were known for being highly corrupt, often protecting influential figures. Number 2. The Hodel case. Apparently the wiretaps at George Hodel's house were interrupted without explanation, leading some to suspect political or police interference. Number 3. Hollywood connection. Elizabeth Short was frequently seen at Hollywood social circuses, raising the possibility that someone connected to the industry was involved in the crime. Although police corruption at the time is well documented, there is no concrete evidence that powerful figures directly influenced the investigation into the case. The mutilation and positioning of Elizabeth's body indicate that the murder may have been a ritual or symbolic act. Number 1. Body positioning. The body was found deliberately positioned with arms raised and legs spread, suggesting the killer wanted to convey a message or perform a ritual. Number 2. The artistic interest. The connection between George Hodel and surrealist art has led some to believe that the murder was a form of macabre art. This theory, although intriguing, does not present concrete evidence that links the case to known ritualistic practices. Elizabeth Short could have been the victim of a serial killer who was never identified or a random crime committed by a stranger. The brutality of the murder and the mutilation are characteristics associated with serial killers. The lack of a clear connection between Elizabeth and the killer may indicate that she was a target of opportunity. Although several serial killers operated in the 1940s, there are no other similar crimes documented in Los Angeles that could be related to the crime of Elizabeth Short. Theories surrounding the Black Dahlia case continue to intrigue investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Each suspect and theory has presented compelling arguments, but the lack of physical evidence and the limitations of the time have made solving this case difficult. The case has inspired countless books, films and documentaries. The brutality of the crime and the mystery involved have made this case a global obsession. Elizabeth Short became a symbol of the exploration of the dark side of Hollywood's golden age. Elizabeth Short remains a tragic figure remembered as much for her beauty as for the horrific way in which she lost her life. Almost 80 years later, the mystery of the Black Dahlia still intrigues and fascinates. Who killed Elizabeth Short? Will we ever know the truth? Or did the killer take the secret to the grave? We want to know what your theory is. Leave your opinions in the comments, and keep following our channel for more mysterious episodes. And remember, every mystery has a story, but not always an answer.